Hello, and welcome to Expert Subjects Weekly Podcast. This week, we will be discussing resources for writers who may not have the interest or the ability to take part in writers' groups or conferences. Some writers choose to isolate themselves in order to be productive. They may live as hermits much of their lives, like Emily Dickinson or J.D. Salinger, or they may take off for short or long durations and hole up in a shack or a mountaintop or a hotel room in the bayou. There were times when I drove 200 miles to have a weekend to write without my children to distract me or need my attention. It's a luxury as a writer to have undisturbed time, to be left alone with your thoughts and the blank page to fill. But what if you don't want complete isolation or to write in a complete vacuum? Over the years, I've crouched on many different resources for different reasons. And over the years, the resources available to writers have become as varied and as bountiful as a well-tended garden. The internet has had an undeniable impact on writing in just about every way that can be imagined. As a writer in my 40s, I was coming into the scene in the 1980s when the publishing world was filled with literati and writers like Jay McInerney or Tom Wolfe, who were the celebrities who got the attention of Paris Hilton or Kim Kardashian. I worked on an IBM Selectric typewriter at Simon & Schuster and answered unsolicited queries or manuscripts one at a time with a personally constructed note on letterhead. It makes my head spin to see how things for writers are in a perpetual state of change, not necessarily for the better, not necessarily for the worse, but unstoppable change. So what's out there? What's offered on the internet? And how can it be productive and enlightening for you as a writer? For one thing, you can read plenty of helpful advice on the subject of writing without having to travel to a library or past the mammoth and empty space that was once your beloved borders. You can find just about any topic, from grammar to how to write screenplays or how to get your memoir done. There are blogs and forums and tutorials for writers, and even online courses where you can study one-on-one with a talented writing instructor. You just need to use your discretion and make sure you're taking the advice from someone who will do your writing good, whether it's a casual blog or a more formal instruction, or even a podcast such as this one. I've also enjoyed listening to writers read their own work, such as Billy Collins, who was poet laureate and teaches in New York City. It's inspiring to hear talented writers breathe life into their own work, to read it with the passion and the emotion that they felt, and which was the cause that they got it down on the page in the first place. Books are another great resource for writers. I had one teacher I admired who said repeatedly, if you aren't writing, just make sure you're reading. Read good stuff. If you read quality writing, your own writing will reflect it. I think of what I read as being as important as what I eat. Just as your body would languish if you ate a poor diet, your writing will languish if you only read poor writing. There's nothing wrong with a good beach book to entertain you on vacation, but try to let that be a trait, not a constant. Reading effective and strong writing from different genres and different eras can enrich your voice. When I was a girl, I went through a Judy Blume phase. She was all I would read, and fortunately for me, she was prolific, but at a certain point, my mother told me I needed to read Jane Austen. I was livid. I was 13 and was more interested in Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But my mother insisted, and after struggling with the language of Austen, I soon found I cared about her world and her characters just as much as I had about Bloom's world. Read a lot. Read varied work. For me, this means reading good fiction, good memoir, and good books on writing. Some of my favorite books on writing are Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott, or One Writer's Beginnings by Eudora Welty, and Stephen King's book on writing. You'll see by this sampling how diverse my taste is. Stephen King's book was the biggest surprise to me. Obviously, I knew who he was from the popular writer perspective, but I had never really read any of his books, only seen his movies, so I knew him only in a limited way. I respected and appreciated his storytelling and had a great love for some of his films, like Stand By Me. Then one day, I picked up his book on writing and I was blown away. I read it with a highlighter in one hand and devoured the book like I'd been locked away with nothing to read for years. So collect a bunch of books on writing that you feel feed you. Keep them close and turn to them when you're in need. Another great resource is to read memoirs by writers you admire. I am a great fan of Mary Karr, Joanne Beard, and Alice Sebold. Also Mary Gordon and Rick Moody. To read someone's fiction and then to read his or her memoir gives you a lot of insight into another writer's mind. And this can help you in your own writing. As you move away from books, another great resource for writers is film. Films can inspire you. There are a lot of films on writers. There are films that are adapted from books, or even films that are brilliant stories, all on their own. Some films made about writers' lives, like Sylvia, Virginia Woolf, Keats, they're not always received well by critics or even audiences, but it's still enjoyable to get a glimpse into a writer's life, even if Nicole Kidman does have to wear a ridiculous fake nose. Also, seeing one of your favorite books on the screen can be an incredible experience or a horrible disappointment. Sometimes I'm a fan of doing it in reverse, seeing the movie, then reading the book. Some people have said to me, why bother? But I love the process just as much as I love skipping to the last chapter of a book I'm reading so we can see how the writer is going to actually get me from place to place and how the journey unfolds. Pay attention to what's out there in terms of film and try and see the more quiet movies that may not be getting played or circulated in the mainstream. If you have a movie theater that plays indie films, or if you have Netflix, or if you can stream, a lot of those smaller, quieter movies can be much more worthwhile and inspiring. One recent favorite of mine was Another Earth, which I thought was just an incredible story and had great character development and blended a whole bunch of different components that just really worked well together. So expose yourself to good film as much as you expose yourself to good books. One last topic that I think is really worth thinking about is sharing your work with someone else. If it's not somebody in your town or someone under the same roof as you, it could be a friend from college who lives on the opposite coast, and maybe you send your work back and forth once a month or every week. Just someone who is able to read your work, maybe critique it, give you some advice. That could be a really incredible experience for both people, even if it's just one-sided, even if you're the only one writing and this friend is a good reader and someone whose opinion you trust. It's a very worthwhile relationship to foster, and I've been lucky enough to have a few people in my life who have fallen into that type of relationship with me, and I've really appreciated it and never taken it for granted. So that's it for Writers Resources this week on expertsubjects.com. I hope that you'll join us next week and that you'll keep writing and reading and tuning in. Thank you.